Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, DC. I'm Nick Harper and these are the headlines. Russian President Vladimir Putin delivers a key speech at the Kremlin ceremony to mark annexation of 4 Ukrainian regions after a referendum vote. A Swedish-Danish report says the 4 leaks in the Nord Stream pipelines were caused by underwater explosions, corresponding to hundreds of kilograms of explosives. Sweden authorises military exports to Turkey after blocking them in 2019. As Stockholm awaits ratification from Ankara over its NATO application. Iranian security forces open fire on angry protesters as street violence sparked by the death of Kurdish woman Mahsa Amini enters its 3rd week. And climate change increased the rainfall from Hurricane Ian by more than 10%, according to new research, as one of the most powerful storms ever to hit the United States devastates Florida. In a grand ceremony at St. George's Hall in the Kremlin, Russian President Vladimir Putin has announced the annexation of 4 Ukrainian territories: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia and Kherson. Putin's latest move has escalated the 7-month war, taking it to an unpredictable new phase. In his speech, Putin said the decision made by people in these 4 regions must be respected and said that they would be citizens of Russia forever. Putin vowed to protect the annexed regions. The Russian president even repeated claims that Ukraine belongs to Russia. He asked Kiev to end all its military operations and return to the negotiating table.
You will know that in the People's Republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, and in the regions of Zaporizhia and Kherson, referendums were held. The results of these referendums were clear. The people have made their choice. It's a clear choice. Today, we will sign the agreement for People's Republic of Donetsk, the People's Republic of Luhansk, and the region of Zaporizhia, along with the region of Kherson, to become a part of Russia. I believe that there will be federal and constitutional support for the 4 new regions to become part of the Russian Federation, and that is because this is the will of millions of people.
Attacking the West, Putin said the US and its allies are merely looking for ways to break up his country by supporting Ukraine in its fight. He says the West is trying to bring Russia to its knees since the fall of the Soviet Union. The Russian president announced the annexation of 4 areas of Ukraine, which make up almost a 1/5 of Ukraine's territory. The ceremony comes 3 days after Russian-backed authorities held a so-called referendum in the 4 regions. Kiev has described the ceremony as a Kremlin freak show. Ukraine and the West says that voting for the referendums were held under gunpoint and were bogus, illegal and a sham. They've pledged not to recognise the results. Meanwhile, on the ground, Russia continues with its offensive. In Zaporizhia, a Russian missile strike killed at least 23 people and left dozens injured. The missiles hit a convoy of vehicles on the outskirts of the southern Ukrainian city. Well, for more on this, we're joined by Rosie Burchard, who's live for us in Brussels. Rosie, the EU has been meeting on all of this. What's been the response so far?
Well, Nick, this comes as a surprise to no one in Brussels. Most here say this is a page straight out of the Russian playbook, but that has not stopped leaders of the European Union from reacting with dismay to this news. Now, they have released a statement in which they say, "We do not and will never recognise the illegal so-called referenda that Russia has engineered as a pretext for this further violation of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity, nor their falsified and illegal results." So that's just a taste of the kind of language EU leaders are using when it comes to their reaction to this news of annexation. But they've gone further still. The European Commission, which is headquartered right in this building behind me, has put forward new proposals for sanctions against Russia precisely in response to the news of these referendums taking place, or these so-called referendums taking place. Those new sanctions include a ban on EU citizens from sitting on the boards or governing bodies of Russian state-owned companies, and tightening existing export bans on goods and products that travel from the European Union toward Russia. And the goal there really is to try and prevent Russia from further modernising its weapons, so trying to tighten the screws on the one hand on the Kremlin's ability to keep financing its war in Ukraine, and also to try and reduce Russia's capacities on the battlefield. Now, none of those sanctions are particularly contentious, but there is a disagreement among EU members overall on how to proceed when it comes to this policy of sanctioning Russia. Remember, the EU has imposed successive rounds of sanctions on Moscow since the invasion of Ukraine. Some EU leaders, for example, Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas, would like to see sanctions go much further still. She wants a full price cap on Russian oil and gas. Meanwhile, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban is sceptical of the whole policy of sanctions and says they are not working. Sanctions need the unanimous backing of all 27 EU leaders to move forward, so there will still be plenty of debate to be had among these leaders in the European Union, despite this unity presented today with this statement criticising heavily Russia's latest actions.
And Rosie, the EU has also just announced new guidelines on Russians entering the bloc. What more do we know about that?
I just left a press conference where EU Home Affairs Commissioner Ylva Johansson announced and asked member states to really clamp down on the issuance of visas for Russians. Now, she said this comes within an overall context of Russia escalating this war and therefore escalating, she said, the security threat which is posed to the European Union. She referenced Russia making threats of use of nuclear weapons. She also mentioned the fact that Russia has now partially mobilised part of its citizens to fight in Ukraine and to bolster its force on the battlefield. And beyond that, she also mentioned what she said is there have been cases of Russian citizens entering the European Union as tourists in order to either provoke Ukrainian refugees or spread propaganda for Vladimir Putin. Now, within that context, the European Commission, the bloc's executive, is asking member states to make more thorough border checks, to reassess existing visas and to turn down any visa requests should they suspect that anyone from Russia intends to stay more than the 90 days that their visa may allow. Now, I should say it's already pretty difficult for Russians to enter the European Union for several reasons. There is a ban on Russian flights entering EU airspace as part of sanctions. Beyond that, there is also what was a visa facilitation scheme which gave Russians privileged access to the EU has been totally suspended. And beyond that, the countries which share land borders with Russia are seriously restricting entry, particularly to tourists. So there are few conditions on which Russians can still enter the EU. The European Commission now asking member states to clamp down on that further, though Ylva Johansson said that Russians still have the right to apply for asylum in the bloc and that these new recommendations do not affect that right to asylum, although that, of course, that is impacted by these different travel bans on entry into the European Union through the land borders, or those flight bans which will make it more difficult, in some would say, to apply for asylum. But the Commissioner highlighting and insisting that Russians still have the right to apply for asylum in the EU should they wish to.
Rosie, thank you. That was Rosie Butcher joining us live from Brussels.
This could be the deadliest hurricane in Florida's history.
Forecasters expect Hurricane Ian to cause life-threatening storm surges in the Carolinas. This after the hurricane left a trail of devastation in Florida, where it left at least 19 dead in its wake. Debris destroyed boats and houses inundated. These images are from a bay in Fort Myers Beach. The drone images show how boats were washed ashore and left lodged between buildings. The storm has left millions without power, and residents are now slowly returning to their homes, only to find that their life's earnings have been completely ravaged by the storm. The Florida governor has described the destruction in the southwest part of the southern coastal state as a 500-year flood event.
I just got back from surveying the damage in Charlotte and Lee counties, and some of the damage was almost indescribable. To see a house just sitting in the middle of Estero Bay literally must have gotten picked up, flown because of the massive wind speed and the storm surge, and deposited in a body of water.
You know, the refrigerator was over here. That's my generator. Totally underwater. You know, this was over here. Everything just floated all, of course, it floated all around. And I can't even walk through the house because everything is, it all floats up and then, everything is everywhere. So, but, it's just stuff. The main thing in a storm is to keep yourself and your family safe. I mean, you can always move on, right? We can always move on, get more stuff, or not. My load will be lighter.
Ian ploughed into Florida's Gulf Coast with catastrophic force on Wednesday, unleashing howling winds, torrential rains. A treacherous surge of open surge made it one of the most powerful US storms in recent years. Florida authorities say at least 700 rescues, mostly by air, were conducted on Thursday, involving the US Coast Guard, the National Guard, and urban search and rescue teams. Ian has regained hurricane strength as it powers across the Atlantic Ocean and is now moving towards the Carolinas as a Category 1 storm.
Doesn't make much difference whether this comes in at hurricane strength or below it storm strength or somewhere on the line, because it's going to be blowing strong winds. It's going to be all over the state at different levels, as you can see if you go and look at those maps. But we know we're going to have a lot of water.
And it's not only people in Florida or the Carolinas. Cubans continue to reel under the devastation brought by the hurricane. It's the third day since the storm wreaked havoc, and parts of the country are still without power. Cubans took to the streets on Thursday night, banging pots and pans in protest across several neighborhoods in the capital, Havana.
Que todo está muy mal, que todo es mentira, que no se resuelve nada, que un supuesto ciclón que pasó, que afectó diferentes provincias. A nosotros no nos pasó nada, Ciudad Habana supuestamente no pasó nada, y el municipio de nosotros, este 10 de octubre, hay muchos lugares alumbrados, y ¿por qué nosotros no tenemos luz todavía? Y no nos dan una respuesta de nada.
¡Se me jodió!
Well, amid tensions over North Korea's recent series of missile tests, the naval forces of South Korea, the United States of America and Japan are holding major trilateral anti-submarine exercises for the first time in 5 years. The drills are being held in international waters off the Korean Peninsula's east coast. It comes just a day after North Korea fired 2 ballistic missiles towards its east coast. The South Korean Navy has said that the exercises are designed to improve their capability to respond to increasing submarine threats from North Korea. Under the anti-submarine drills, the navies of all 3 countries, that's South Korea, Japan and the United States, will track down a mock North Korean submarine while communicating with one another. The exercises will bring together various warships. To name some of them, the USS Ronald Reagan aircraft carrier, the 9,800-ton guided missile cruiser, the USS Chancellorsville, the 6,900-ton Aegis-equipped destroyer, USS Barry, South Korea's 4,400-ton destroyer, Munmu the Great, and Japan's 5,100-ton tanker, Asahi. The drills also come days after the US-based think tank said that North Korea might be preparing to launch a new submarine that's believed to be capable of firing ballistic missiles. South Korea's military has also said that it has detected signs of how North Korea might be gearing up for a submarine-launched ballistic missile test. Protests have continued in several cities across Iran against the death of young women in police custody. A human rights group says at least 83 people have been killed in nearly 2 weeks of demonstrations.
It's been nearly 2 weeks since Mahsa Amini died in police custody in Iran, and protests are far from over. Iran human rights and Norway-based groups said at least 83 people have been killed. Her death has sparked global anger, leading to protests across Iran and all over the world. Despite the increasing death toll and a fierce crackdown by authorities, videos posted on Twitter show demonstrators calling for the fall of the clerical establishment in Tehran, Qom and other major Iranian cities. Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi has said the unrest was the latest move by hostile Western powers against Iran since the Islamic Revolution in 1979.
The Islamic Republic's red line is the security of the people's life and property. We cannot in any way allow the trespassing of the life and property of people and for people to want to disrupt the security of society.
Germany's foreign minister said on Thursday she wanted the European Union to impose sanctions on Iran in the wake of Amini's death.
I'm doing everything I can within the EU framework so that we can start to impose sanctions, especially now, while we keep on negotiating on the JCPOA, to impose sanctions on those in Iran who ruthlessly beat women to death in the name of religion, who gun down protesters.
In Norway, many people try to get into the Iranian embassy in Oslo during an angry demonstration where 2 people were injured, Norwegian police said. In London, formerly detained British-Iranian aid worker Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe filmed herself on Wednesday, cutting her hair in support of protests in Iran over Amini's death.
Well, the COVID-19 pandemic has left many businesses reeling. Firms across the world have faced the brunt equally. But for Chinese businesses, the storm just doesn't seem to be passing. The country has had one of the major restrictive measures, and it's been one of the last to lift those stringent lockdown measures. But even after that, foreign businesses are struggling to remain afloat. Holiday rental giant Airbnb have shut operations in China, and many other European and American firms are planning to move out. Shanghai is known as the business capital, but it has struggled recently. Overseas investment projects are tumbling. They fell more than 20% compared to last year. This April, new foreign investment ventures stood at just 13. It was 305 in March the year before that. China's gross domestic product growth has been on a steady decline. From 10.6% in 2010, it's tumbled down to 5.1% last year. The country is also facing the challenge of a liquidity trap, which means that businesses are reluctant to borrow or invest money. There's a fear of poor returns amid low interest rates. These numbers are, of course, concerning because China is the world's second largest economy after the United States, and a bloody Chinese market is bound to have a ripple effect around the world. This comes, of course, during uncertain times. The world economy is already in a downturn. The United States has been introducing aggressive rate hikes to try and tame inflation. The United Kingdom Central Bank is soon to buy bonds to try and stabilise the economy there. And the war in Ukraine has been battering European markets. Nigeria is battling its worst floods in a decade. More than 300 people have been killed, houses have been washed away and farmlands destroyed. Authorities say that the situation is now beyond control. Farmers in Nigeria are worried that their fields have been submerged in floodwaters. Our next report gets you more.
Adamu Garba, a Nigeria-based rice farmer, treads barefoot through his paddy fields. He's been assessing the damage caused to his farmlands. As devastating floods ravaged major parts of the country, the National Emergency Management Agency reported that over 500,000 people across 27 states are affected. Crops across the country's farmlands are wiped out. The region is already struggling with an economic fallout, and the floods are worsening food insecurity. Farmers like him are looking at an uncertain future, as they have incurred heavy losses. Every season, they would harvest 200 bags of rice. Now they are unsure if they would reach half of that target.
We are calling on the government and international agencies to assist us. We are appealing to whoever can help to please show compassion and come to our aid, because we really need help.
Garba's field has become completely barren. Excessive rains washed away a nearby bridge. The debris covered his entire field. He does not even have his land to plant crops. Others like Alasan are preparing themselves to harvest on the little patches of land left.
We were unfortunate to have experienced floods. The floods washed sand from the road and covered our paddy fields. This is the little we have left, by Allah's grace, which we are going to harvest. The rains have never been this destructive.
Apart from heavy rains, what made matters worse was dams overflowing in Cameroon and Nigeria releasing water to ease pressure on its Kenji and Jeba dams. Parts of Nigeria, from northern farmlands to the coastal economic capital Lagos, are prone to flooding in the rainy season. The National Emergency Management Agency says this year is the worst since 2012. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
There are rising tensions between China and the United States over several issues. US lawmakers have become increasingly wary of how American tech firms do business in China. The latest company in focus is Microsoft. The tech firm continues to expand in China. The company plans to recruit new Chinese staff in the coming year. It currently has around roughly 9,000 employees, and it aims to grow its Chinese headcount to 10,000 over the next year. The tech firm also has plans to upgrade and expand its campuses in Beijing and Shanghai over the next 3 to 5 years. Interestingly, the company has made the announcement in a little-noticed Chinese-language WeChat post. Microsoft appears to have not made the same announcement in any English-language media. Microsoft's new hiring plan puts it in stark contrast to its rivals Google and Meta, companies that have appeared to have largely abandoned China in recent years. Now the question is, will Microsoft face US scrutiny? Well, it seems unlikely. According to former Homeland Security official Paul Rosenzweig, Microsoft has faced less scrutiny from lawmakers due to its extensive contracts with the US government and the military. The government's dependency on Microsoft could make US regulators less likely to raise concerns about its Chinese operation. The move by Microsoft highlights that a part of the US tech community still sees China as an ideal market. Well, that's it for today. I'm Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. As always, thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back again next week.
There are many other